It's hard to take a walk in your neighborhood or to look out the window without seeing plants. From large trees to grass and flowers to mosses and ferns, plants are found just about everywhere on the planet. In fact, there are over 290,000 different species of plants that have already been found and named, with more being discovered every year. What are the origins of plants? How did they evolve? How have they become so successful? What are some of the various groups of plants? And what are their major characteristics? During the next few minutes, we're going to answer these questions and others as we explore the fascinating origin and diversity of plants. In its first 2 billion years, planet Earth saw only small advances in the development of life. In fact, the first single-celled organisms that possessed a cell nucleus, eukaryotes, appeared about 1.5 billion years ago. Such early organisms likely developed in aquatic environments. It's hypothesized that the first plants evolved from multicellular green algae that lived in fresh water. Fossil evidence points to many biochemical and structural similarities between plants and green algae. Some of these include similar chloroplasts and photosynthetic pigments, commonalities in composition of cell walls, and the presence of a cell plate during cell division. In order to survive on land, plants had to overcome many obstacles. You decide. List 2 obstacles that plants needed to overcome to survive on land. One major obstacle was preventing water loss on land. They also had to develop the ability to transport materials. They had to devise a way to support themselves, and they needed to design a means by which to reproduce. The earliest land plants are thought to have evolved beginning about 476 million years ago. They were most likely small, moss-like organisms. One means to prevent water loss was the development of a cuticle, a waxy, waterproof layer that coats plants and prevents evaporation. The fact that these early plants were small, perhaps only a few cells thick, meant they did not need much support. Due to the fact that they were dependent on water for reproduction, early land plants most likely lived in moist environments. Evidence points to the fact that early land plants also had a life cycle that involved the alternation of generations. We'll explain that more in detail later. Modern plants are able to survive on land because they have specialized structures that green algae do not possess. Some of these structures include leaves, stems, and roots, to name just a few. Today, there are over 290,000 known species of living plants that are grouped in 12 phyla, sometimes referred to as divisions. As we previously discussed, the earliest plants were short, non-vascular plants that lived in moist places. Non-vascular plants do not have vascular conducting tissue to transport materials within the plant. Modern descendants of these early organisms include mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, represented in 3 separate phyla. While these 3 phyla are different, they all share some common features. For example, most of their water is absorbed through the plant body. Because their sperm must swim through water to reach eggs for fertilization, non-vascular plants tend to live in moist places. You're probably familiar with plants called mosses in the phylum Bryophyta. You observe. Describe the general appearance of this moss. This moss forms a short, low-lying green mat. Mosses are commonly seen growing at the base of trees, moist rocks, and in other damp places. They're found throughout the world and number over 12,000 species. Mosses have alternate generations, which means they have different forms that alternate between a spore-producing stage called a sporophyte generation and a gamete-producing stage called the gametophyte generation. Each of these generations looks different. In mosses, the haploid gametophyte phase is the prominent stage you commonly see. Another group of non-vascular plants, liverworts, in the phylum Hepatocophyta, include low-lying plants, some of which resemble two lobes of a liver. Similar to mosses, the most prominent stage of the liverwort life cycle is the gametophyte phase. Many liverworts are leafy and resemble mosses. Hornworts, in the division Pteradophyta, possess sporophytes rising from gametophytes that are quite visible. The human body contains a vast network of blood vessels and other vascular tissues that conduct materials. Many types of plants, referred to as vascular plants or tracheophytes, also possess structures referred to as vascular tissues that conduct materials throughout the organism. Vascular tissues consist of strands of specialized elongated cells that form a network responsible for moving water and other materials throughout the plant. With the evolution of vascular tissues, plants populated drier regions of Earth and were able to grow to great heights. For ease of study, the 9 phyla of vascular plants are divided into 2 groups, seedless plants and seed plants. Let's discuss the 2 major phyla of seedless vascular plants. The largest and most familiar group of seedless vascular plants are in the division Pteradophyta, of which there are over 18,000 living species. Ferns are the most abundant group in this phylum and are thought to have originated about 350 million years ago. Ferns tend to have feathery leaves called fronds that do a good job of collecting light in shady areas on the forest floor. They possess true stems and roots as well. The widely recognized sporophyte life form of ferns generally do not reach great heights, usually less than 2 meters. You observe. What do you notice on the underside of this fern leaf? Adult fern sporophytes commonly produce spores contained in structures called sporangia. In turn, sporangi form clusters called sori that are typically found on the underside of fern fronds. Once spores are released and land in a suitable place, they develop into small, heart-shaped leafy plants called prothallus. This is the gametophyte phase. In the gametophyte phase, both eggs and sperm cells are produced, which when united form a fully diploid zygote. Water is necessary for the process of fertilization, which is why ferns are mostly located in moister environments. Over time, the zygote grows into a larger sporophyte form. A small, closely related group of ferns called whisk ferns in the phylum Xylitophyta lack leaves and instead possess scale-like branches. Another small group of plants in the division Sphenophyta are horsetails. They possess ribbed, jointed stems that are hollow. Club mosses in the division Lycophyta include over 1,000 known species. You probably recognize this tree as a pine tree. This specific tree, a white pine, belongs to a large group of plants called Gymnosperms. Gymnosperms are vascular plants that produce seeds within cones. The seeds Gymnosperms produce are often called naked seeds because the ovule is not encased within tissue at the time of fertilization. The largest group of Gymnosperms, with over 600 species, are in the division Coniferophyta. Generally referred to as conifers, this division includes pines, firs, cedars, hemlocks, yews, cypress, redwoods, and others. Conifers include some of the oldest and largest trees on Earth. This bristlecone pine, for example, is over 1,600 years old. Some are more than 5,000 years old. And this giant redwood is nearly 100 meters tall. Many conifers are valuable economically and are used as sources of lumber, paper products, and fuel. Conifers possess needles instead of broad leaves. In conifers, male pollen grains are produced in male cones. Mature pollen grains travel from the male cone to the female cone, where they fertilize the female gametophyte. Mature seeds are released from the cone to favorable sites where they germinate and grow into mature trees. The division Cicattophyta consists of over 200 species of tropical and subtropical slow-growing gymnosperms that look similar to palm trees but are non-flowering. They produce cones and have a life cycle similar to that of conifers. The division Ginkgophyta includes a single species of tree called a ginkgo. It consists of a deciduous tree with fan-shaped leaves and reproduces via separate male and female cones. The fourth division of gymnosperms, Gnetophyta, includes about 65 varied and diverse species. A day hardly goes by in your life without eating something derived from an angiosperm plant. You decide. What's the main distinguishing feature of angiosperms? The main distinguishing feature of angiosperms is the presence of flowers. Often referred to as flowering plants, the division Angiosperma includes the vast majority of plants, over 230,000 species. The fruits and vegetables we eat, much of the wood used to build furniture, and a great deal of the oxygen we breathe are just some of the many valuable resources derived from angiosperms. Whatever their size, color, or shape, flowers are a very important part of life on Earth. Most angiosperms have roots, stems, and leaves that contain vascular tissue. Sexual reproduction in angiosperms relies not on movement of gametophytes within water, but on air currents or pollinating organisms. Flowers contain male and female parts that may or may not be on the same flower. Flowers produce haploid gametophytes in the form of male pollen and female eggs. Through the process of pollination, male pollen is transferred via the wind or pollinators, such as insects, to the female part of the flower, where the egg is fertilized. The diploid fertilized egg forms a seed that is encased in a fruit. The seed contains the full genetic information that, under favorable conditions, can give rise to a new plant. Angiosperms are grouped, described, and classified based on a wide variety of characteristics, including seeds, roots, stems, flowers, leaves, phylogenetic relationships, and genetic makeup. During the past few minutes, we've explored some of the fascinating origins and diversity of plants. We discussed how plants evolved from green algae and explored the many obstacles they needed to overcome to successfully live on land. Many of the fundamental characteristics of non-vascular plants were highlighted. Next, we investigated some of the major divisions of seedless vascular plants, highlighting their characteristics. The naked seed plants, Gymnosperms, were discussed. And finally, the flowering plants, Angiosperms, were highlighted. We saw that Angiosperms are by far the most abundant, widespread, and valuable plants, having a huge impact on our daily lives. Fill in the blank with the correct word. Number 1. It's hypothesized that the first plants evolved from multicellular green. Number 2. The first plants are thought to have appeared about a million years ago. Number 3. The division Bryophyta includes Number 4. Non-vascular plants tend to be low-lying and live in environments. Number 5. Tracheophytes contain tissue that conducts water and other materials throughout the plant. Number 6. Are vascular seedless plants in the division Pteradophyta. Number 7. The adult fern produces spores arranged in clusters on the underside of fronds. Number 8. Plants in the division Coniferaophyta possess, instead of broad leaves. Number 9. Apples, grasses, and roses are in the division and number 10. Involves the transfer of male pollen to the female part of the flower.